Hello everyone, my name is the Shadow Script, and today I'm bringing you something that will absolutely shake you to your core. What I'm about to share with you is not just another story. This is something that connects to one of the darkest networks ever exposed, and what happened afterward, in the shadows, where most people never look. Before we begin, I need to tell you something that happened 3 weeks ago, and I need you to listen carefully, because what I'm about to reveal has already cost people their lives, their sanity, and their souls. But first, I can see that most of you watching haven't subscribed yet, so please, do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and ring that bell icon, because content like this, content that exposes the darkest corners of our world, needs to reach as many people as possible. Also, comment down below where you're watching from, and whether you believe in places that hold memories, places that refuse to forget the evil committed within their walls. Now, let me take you back to where this all begins. The year is 2019, and the world is reeling from the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein, a man whose name had become synonymous with power, wealth, and unspeakable evil. When he died in that cell in August of 2019, officially ruled a suicide, most people thought the story was over. They thought justice, however incomplete, had been served. They thought the nightmare was finally ending. But they were wrong, so terribly, horrifically wrong. Because what most people don't know, what the media never reported, what was deliberately buried under layers of legal proceedings and powerful people protecting their interests, is that Jeffrey Epstein's network, his empire of blackmail and control, didn't end with his death. In fact, his death was just the beginning of something far more sinister, something that exists in the space between the living and the dead, something that defies rational explanation. Let me introduce you to someone whose life was destroyed by what he discovered. His name was James Morrison, and 3 weeks ago, he sent me everything he had documented, everything he had witnessed before he disappeared. James Morrison wasn't a journalist. He wasn't an investigator. He was a paranormal researcher. Someone who spent his life documenting haunted locations, capturing evidence of the supernatural, the unexplained, the impossible. He had investigated hundreds of locations over 15 years, abandoned asylums, old battlefields, houses where murders had occurred. He had seen shadow figures, heard disembodied voices, captured strange anomalies on camera. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for what he would encounter at the mansion. The mansion I'm talking about is real. It exists, though I cannot tell you exactly where, for reasons that will become clear. This property was part of Jeffrey Epstein's network, one of several locations used by his circle. But this particular mansion, this one was different. This one was special. This one was where they sent the people who knew too much, the ones who needed to be controlled through fear rather than money, the ones who had seen things that could never be allowed into the light. After Epstein's death, this mansion sat empty. Officially, it was seized by authorities, but the legal battles over the property dragged on for months, then years. The estate was tied up in so much litigation, so many layers of shell companies and offshore trusts, that it became a ghost property, legally owned by everyone and no one. And in that limbo, that space between legal ownership and abandonment, something began to happen. James first heard about the mansion in October of 2021. He was attending a paranormal investigation conference in Amsterdam, where he met a woman named Elena Frost. Elena was a former housekeeper, not for this specific property, but for another estate in Epstein's network. She had left that life behind, moved to Europe, changed her name, tried to forget, but she couldn't forget because she had heard the stories, whispers among the staff, about the mansion that no one talked about. They met at a small cafe after one of the conference sessions. Elena had approached James specifically because she had seen his presentation on locations that seemed to retain traumatic memories, places where violence and suffering had somehow imprinted themselves on a physical space. She sat down across from him, ordered coffee she never drank, and said something that made James' blood run cold. "I know of a place, a mansion, where something is very wrong. The security guards who were posted there after the seizure, 3 of them quit in the first week. 2 more lasted a month before they refused to go back. The company that hired them, they can't keep anyone stationed there for more than a few days. People hear things, see things, and they run. But here's what's strange. Here's what makes it different from a normal haunting. The things people see, the things they hear, they're not random. They're specific. They're memories, playing out like recordings, but recordings that know you're watching, recordings that react to you. James asked her how she knew this. Elena looked around the cafe nervously, making sure no one was listening, and then she leaned in close. Because I went there 2 months ago. I had to see it for myself. I had to know if the stories were true. And what I experienced, what I saw, convinced me that some places, some locations, where truly horrific things happened, they don't just remember. They hold on to it, they become it. And that mansion, it's alive with everything that happened there, every scream, every moment of terror, every act of evil. It's all still there, trapped in those walls, waiting. She gave James an address, written on a napkin, and then she left. Before walking away, she turned back and said, "If you go there, and I think you will because I can see it in your eyes, you need to understand something. Whatever is in that mansion, it doesn't want to be forgotten. It wants to be witnessed. It wants people to know. But witnessing comes with a price, and some people, they don't come back the same." James sat in that cafe for another 2 hours, staring at that address. He knew he was going to go. He had to go. This was exactly the kind of case he had been searching for his entire career. Evidence that trauma could imprint itself on physical space, that evil could leave a permanent mark on reality itself. But he didn't go alone. He couldn't. Not to a place like that. Over the next 3 months, James assembled a small team. First was Thomas Werner, a tech specialist who designed custom recording equipment for paranormal investigations, cameras with full-spectrum capabilities, audio recorders that could pick up frequencies beyond human hearing, electromagnetic field detectors, thermal imaging, everything they would need to document whatever they found. Second was Victoria Hayes, psychic medium. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You don't believe in psychics. You think it's all cold reading and tricks, and maybe you're right about most of them. But Victoria was different. James had worked with her on 3 previous investigations, and she had demonstrated abilities that he couldn't explain. She could sense presences before equipment registered them. She could describe events that had happened in locations she knew nothing about. And most importantly, she could communicate. She could interact with whatever existed in these spaces. The third member was David Chun, a former detective who had worked in the Crimes Against Children unit before retiring early due to PTSD. David had spent 15 years investigating the worst humanity had to offer, and he had developed what he called an instinct for evil. He could walk into a room and know if something terrible had happened there. He had agreed to come on this investigation for one reason, because he had followed the Epstein case closely, had even worked peripherally on some related investigations, and he wanted to know the truth about what had really happened in these properties. The team met in Paris in February of 2022. James had spent weeks trying to gain legal access to the mansion, filing requests, contacting lawyers, reaching out to the authorities who supposedly controlled the property. But every inquiry was met with delays, denials, or simply ignored. So they made a decision. They would go without permission. They would document everything they found and deal with any legal consequences later. Before I continue, I need you to do something for me. I need you to like this video right now. And I need you to share it, because what I'm about to tell you, what James documented, this needs to be seen by as many people as possible. The truth has a way of getting buried when it threatens powerful interests, so help me make sure the story reaches everyone. They arrived at the location on a Friday night in March. The drive from Paris had taken 4 hours, through increasingly remote countryside, along roads that seemed to want to discourage visitors. The mansion sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, exactly as described, but seeing it in person, James said it felt wrong even from a distance. The architecture was beautiful, almost castle-like, with tall windows and elegant stonework, but there was something about the way it sat on that cliff, the way it seemed to loom against the darkening sky, that made them all feel like they were approaching something that shouldn't be approached. The gates were locked, but they had expected that. David had brought bolt cutters, and within minutes they were through. As they walked up the long driveway, their footsteps crunching on gravel, Thomas was already setting up equipment, attaching GoPro cameras to their vests turning on audio recorders, checking the electromagnetic field detectors. Victoria stopped about halfway up the drive. She had gone completely pale. Her hands were shaking. James asked her what was wrong. She said, "Can't you feel it, the weight? It's like the air itself is pressing down, like we're walking into something that knows we're coming. That's been waiting for us." David put his hand on his service weapon, a habit from his police days. Even though he knew a gun would be useless against whatever they might encounter, he said, "I've been to crime scenes where children were hurt, where terrible things happened, and this feels worse. This feels like all of those places combined, concentrated." But they didn't turn back. They kept walking. They reached the front door, another lock, another minute with tools, and then they were inside. The interior of the mansion was exactly as Elena had described. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, expensive artwork still hanging on the walls. It looked like someone had simply walked away one day and never returned. There was still furniture, still decorations, still that veneer of luxury that masked what had really happened here. But the smell. James described the smell in his notes, not of decay or rot, but of something else, something sweet and cloying that made them all feel nauseous. Thomas checked his equipment. Everything was functioning normally. Temperature was cool, but not unusual. Electromagnetic fields were baseline. They decided to split up, a decision James would later say was their first mistake. Thomas would stay in the main entrance hall, monitoring equipment and maintaining communication with the others. James and David would explore the upper floors, and Victoria would investigate the ground floor, including the kitchen, the dining room, and other service areas. They had been inside for maybe 15 minutes. James and David were on second floor, opening doors, finding bedrooms that looked like luxury hotel suites, when Thomas' voice came through their radios. "Guys, I'm picking up something on the audio. Just came through. You need to hear this." Thomas played back the recording, and what they heard, what was captured on that digital recorder, was a voice, clear as day, speaking in a whisper. "They're here. Tell them we're here. Tell them we remember." It was a female voice, young, terrified. Victoria came through on the radio, her voice shaking. "I just heard that too, but not through radio. I heard it directly, coming from downstairs, from below us. There's a basement. I found the door. It's locked from the inside." They all converged at the basement door. It was heavy wood, reinforced, the kind of door that was designed to keep people in, not out. David tried the handle, locked. He put his shoulder into it, nothing. Thomas suggested they look for another way in, maybe an exterior entrance. But Victoria said, "Wait, just wait." She placed her hand on the door, closed her eyes, and they all watched as she went completely still. For almost a minute she didn't move, didn't breathe. And then she opened her eyes, and they were filled with tears. There's so many of them, so many voices. All try to be heard at once. They're trapped, not physically, but their fear, their pain. It soaked into this place so deeply that it left an imprint, an echo. And that echo, it's desperate to communicate, to show what happened here, to make someone understand. Before anyone could respond, they heard it. A sound from behind the door, not knocking, not scratching, but footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming upstairs, getting closer. David immediately stepped in front of the others, his hand on his weapon. "Who's there? If someone is in this house, you need to identify yourself." The footsteps stopped, right on the other side of the door. And then the lock clicked from the inside, and the door slowly swung open. The basement stairs descended into darkness. Their flashlights barely penetrated the black, but they could see the first few steps, concrete, with something dark stained into them. Thomas' electromagnetic field detector suddenly spiked, the needle jumping to the maximum reading. The temperature dropped. They could see their breath. James made the decision. "We're going down. Thomas, you stay up here, monitor everything. If we're not back in 30 minutes, or if anything happens, you get out and call for help. Understood?" Thomas nodded, clearly relieved he wasn't going down there. James, David, and Victoria descended into the basement. The stairs seemed longer than they should be, as if they were descending deeper than the foundation should allow. The air grew colder with each step, and that sweet, sickly smell became stronger, mixed now with something else, something that smelled like copper, like blood. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a hallway, concrete walls, fluorescent lights overhead that were somehow still functioning, casting everything in a harsh clinical glow. There were doors along the hallway, maybe 6 or 7 of them, all closed. Victoria was having trouble breathing. This is where it happened. This is where the worst of it happened. I can feel them, dozens of them, all the fear, all the pain. It's like it's happening right now, like time doesn't exist down here. David tried the first door, unlocked. Inside was a room, maybe 12 by 12 feet, completely empty except for a single chair bolted to the floor, and cameras, multiple cameras mounted in the corners, all pointing at that chair. The walls were bare concrete, but there were marks on them, scratches, like someone had clawed at them desperately. The second room was similar, another chair, more cameras, but this one had something else. There were restraints attached to the chair, leather straps with buckles, and on the floor, dark stains that had been scrubbed, but never fully removed. James was documenting everything with his camera. David was examining the rooms with a detective's eye, and Victoria was standing in the hallway, tears streaming down her face, saying over and over, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. I'm so sorry." They checked 4 more rooms, all variations of the same nightmare. Chairs, cameras, restraints, evidence of violence that had been sanitized, but never truly cleaned. And at the end of the hallway, there was one more door, larger than the others, with keycard reader mounted next to it. The reader was still lit, still active, somehow still had power after all this time. David tried the handle locked. James examined the keycard reader, looking for any way to bypass it, and then Victoria stepped forward. She placed her hand on the reader, and they heard it, a voice, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The same female voice from the recording earlier, but clearer now, more present. "The key is upstairs, in the master bedroom, in the safe behind the painting. The combination is the day she died, August 10th, 2019. They all stood frozen, staring at each other. That was the date of Jeffrey Epstein's death. James made a decision. "David, you stay here. Victoria and I will go back upstairs and find this keycard. We need to see what's in that room." David didn't argue. He stood in the hallway, weapon drawn, watching both ends, as James and Victoria climbed back up the stairs. Thomas was exactly where they'd left him, monitoring equipment. "You guys okay? I've been picking up crazy readings, electromagnetic spikes, temperature fluctuations, and the audio. The audio has been going insane, voices, crying, whispers. All of it just started about 5 minutes ago." James and Victoria quickly explained what they'd found and what they needed to do. Thomas showed them the audio recordings he'd captured while they were downstairs, dozens of voices, overlapping, some speaking English, some French, some other languages, all of them sounding desperate, scared, and young, so terribly young. They found the master bedroom on the 3rd floor. It was enormous, with a 4-poster bed, antique furniture, and walls covered in expensive artwork. James searched for anything that might hide a safe, checking behind paintings, moving furniture, until Victoria called out, "Here, this painting. It's different from the others. It feels different." The painting depicted a storm at sea, dark waves crashing against rocks. James carefully lifted it away from the wall, and there it was, a wall safe, with a digital keypad. He entered the combination, August 102019. The safe clicked open. Inside, there was a key card, but there was something else too. A leather journal and a USB drive. James grabbed all 3 items. He wanted to look through the journal right then, but Victoria was urging him. "We need to get back to David. We need to finish this." They ran back downstairs, but when they reached the basement door, something was wrong. Thomas' equipment was going haywire. Every detector, every recorder, everything was maxing out, showing readings that shouldn't be possible. And they could hear David shouting from down in the basement, "Get down here. Get down here right now." They ran down the stairs, finding David standing in the middle of the hallway, his flashlight beam shaking, pointed at the walls. And what they saw, what was now visible on those concrete walls, made them all stop breathing. Writing, hundreds of words, names, dates, scratched into the concrete, but they hadn't been there before. James had photographed these walls. They were blank, but now they were covered, and the writing was still appearing, as if invisible hands were carving into the stone right before their eyes. Names they recognized, names that had been in the news, victims who had come forward, victims who had never come forward, and dates spanning years. And at the end of the hallway, the large door with the keycard reader. It was vibrating, like something on the other side was trying to get out. Victoria collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed. They want us to see. They need someone to see, to witness, to know the truth of what happened here. Please, we have to open that door. James approached the door, hands shaking, and swiped the keycard. The reader flashed green. There was a heavy mechanical sound of locks disengaging, and the door swung open. The room beyond was larger than they expected, maybe 30 feet by 30 feet. The walls were lined with servers, computer equipment, blinking lights indicating that somehow, impossibly, these systems were still running, still powered, still functioning. In the center of the room was a desk with multiple monitors, all of them displaying a single image, the view from a security camera pointed at the door, pointed at them. Thomas had followed them down, and he immediately went to the equipment. This is a server room. These are recording servers, massive storage capacity, and they're still active, still recording. Look at the monitors. There are hundreds of camera feeds, not just from this location, from multiple locations, and they're all live, all still broadcasting. David examined the servers more closely. This is the evidence. This is what they were hiding. Recordings from all the properties, all the locations in the network. Everything that happened, everyone who was involved, it's all stored here. But Victoria was standing perfectly still, staring at something else in the room. In the corner, barely visible in the shadows, there was something, a shape, a form, that shouldn't be there. She whispered, "She's here, the girl from the recording, the one who's been guiding us. She's standing right there, and she's not alone. There are others, dozens of them, all standing in the shadows, all watching us, waiting." James turned his camera toward where Victoria was looking. At first his camera showed nothing, just empty space. But then, slowly, the image began to change. Figures started appearing in his viewfinder, translucent, like shadows that were trying to become solid. Young girls, standing in silence, their eyes hollow, their expressions frozen in the moment of their greatest fear. And then they all heard a voice, coming from the computer speakers. The same young female voice, but clearer now, more present. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was 15 years old when they brought me here. That was in 2015. I never left, not really. None of us did. We stayed, trapped in these walls, in these rooms, in the memories of what was done to us. We couldn't move on, couldn't find peace, because no one knew, no one saw, no one believed. But you're here now. You've seen, and now you have to show them. You have to make them understand what happened here. Please, don't let us be forgotten. Don't let this place hide its secrets anymore." Victoria was openly weeping. "I promise we won't forget. We'll show them. We'll make sure everyone knows." But then something changed. The atmosphere in the room shifted, became heavier, darker. The lights began to flicker, and a different voice came through the speakers, deeper, male, angry. "You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have opened this room. These secrets were meant to stay buried, and now you've made a very serious mistake." David immediately raised his weapon. Who is that who's speaking? Thomas was frantically checking his equipment. "It's not coming from the speakers. It's not. I don't know where it's coming from." The figures in the shadows, the girls, they were backing away, as if afraid of something. And then they saw it, materializing in the center of the room. A shadow darker than the others, taller, with a presence that radiated malevolence. Victoria gasped. "That's not a victim. That's something else. That's the embodiment of the evil that happened here. The collective consciousness of every person who committed these acts, their guilt, their evil. It's merged, become something that doesn't want this exposed." The shadow moved toward them, and as it did, the temperature dropped to freezing. The flashlights began to dim. The equipment started failing, and they heard it, a sound like hundreds of voices screaming, wailing, demanding silence. James grabbed the USB drive from his pocket and shoved it into one of the computers. "Thomas, can you copy these files? Can you get them off these servers?" Thomas ran to the desk, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I'm trying, but the system is fighting me. It's like someone or something is trying to stop the transfer. The shadow was getting closer, and now they could see details. A shape that was almost human, wearing what looked like expensive clothing, and where its face should be, there was just darkness, absolute void. David fired his weapon, 3 shots directly at the shadow. The bullets passed through it like it wasn't there, hitting the wall behind, but the gunshots seemed to enrage it. The shadow rushed forward, and when it touched David, he screamed, collapsed, his body convulsing. James and Victoria grabbed him, tried to pull him away, but he was frozen, paralyzed, his eyes wide with terror, looking at something only he could see. Thomas, how much longer? Almost there, almost. I'm copying everything to an external drive. Just a few more seconds. The shadow turned toward Thomas, moving with impossible speed. But then the girls, the shadows in the corner, they stepped forward, placing themselves between the darkness and the living. Victoria could see them, could hear them, all speaking in unison. No, you don't get to hurt anyone else. You don't get to keep hiding. It ends tonight. The room exploded with activity, equipment sparking, monitors cracking, the servers beginning to smoke. The shadow was fighting against the girls, and they were fighting back. Decades of trapped pain and fear finally given purpose, finally given a chance to stop the evil that had controlled them. Got it. I've got the files. We need to go. We need to go now. They grabbed David, who was starting to regain consciousness, and ran out of the server room, down the hallway where the names were still appearing on the walls, up the stairs, through the mansion. The entire building was shaking now, as if the structure itself was coming apart. Lights were exploding, walls were cracking. That sweet, sickly smell was overwhelming. They burst through the front door and ran down the driveway, not stopping until they reached the gates. They could hear behind them the sound of destruction, of something ancient and evil being torn apart. And then silence. They turned back to look at the mansion. It stood there, exactly as it had, no damage, no signs of what had just happened inside. But something was different. The weight, that oppressive feeling, it was gone, as if whatever had been trapped there had finally been released. Victoria collapsed on the ground, exhausted. They're gone. The girls, they're finally free. They stayed all these years, holding on to the evidence, waiting for someone to find it, to expose it. And now they can rest. Thomas was clutching the external hard drive, like his life depended on it. We have it. We have everything. Years of recordings, names, dates, locations. This is the evidence that was supposed to be destroyed. The insurance that Epstein and his network used to control people. It's all here. David was barely conscious, but he managed to say, "What did I see? What did that thing show me? I saw them. All of them. Everyone who came to these places, everyone who participated. I saw their faces, and I recognized so many of them. People who are still in power, still making decisions, still pretending to be respectable." They sat there for almost an hour, none of them able to move, processing what they had experienced, what they had witnessed. Finally, James said, "We need to leave. We need to get this evidence somewhere safe, and then we need to decide what to do with it." They drove back to Paris in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts, trying to comprehend what they had been through. That night, in a hotel room, they examined the files Thomas had copied. Hours upon hours of footage, spreadsheets with names and dates, financial records showing money transfers, communications between high-profile individuals. It was everything, the complete record of a network that had operated in the shadows for decades. But there was a problem. The same problem James would face for the next 2 years. What do you do with evidence like this? Evidence that implicates some of the most powerful people in the world. Evidence that if released publicly would cause global chaos, but that if kept hidden means justice will never be served. James spent weeks trying to figure out the right course of action. He contacted journalists, lawyers, law enforcement in multiple countries. But every time he tried to hand over the evidence, something would happen. His contacts would suddenly become unreachable. Meetings would be canceled. Messages would go unanswered. It was as if there was an invisible force preventing this information from reaching the people who could do something about it. And then the threat started. First just subtle warnings, cars that seemed to follow him, phone calls from blocked numbers with no one speaking. But then they escalated. Thomas was attacked in his home, beaten badly, his equipment destroyed. He survived, but he left the country immediately, disappeared. Victoria started having visions, not from the girls at the mansion, but from something else, something dark that was hunting them. She told James that whatever evil had been at the mansion, it wasn't truly destroyed. It had just been scattered, and now it was trying to silence them, to prevent the evidence from being exposed. She stopped sleeping, started seeing the shadow in every corner, and finally, she checked herself into a psychiatric facility, unable to cope with what she was experiencing. David, his fate was perhaps the worst. The things he had seen when the shadow touched him, the faces, the names, it drove him to obsession. He started his own investigation, trying to track down the people he had seen in that vision, trying to gather more evidence. But one night, he was found in his apartment dead, officially ruled a suicide, a single gunshot wound to the head. But James knew that David would never have taken his own life, not when he was so close to exposing the truth. James realized he was running out of time, that whatever force was protecting these people, it was hunting his team, eliminating anyone who had seen the evidence. So he made copies, multiple copies, and he sent them to people he trusted, people who could keep them safe. One of those copies came to me, along with the files. James sent a message, recorded just days before he disappeared. I've watched it dozens of times, and every time, I see the fear in his eyes, the exhaustion, the knowledge that he was probably going to die. But he also spoke with determination, with purpose. In the message, he said, "If you're watching this, then I'm probably gone. Dead, disappeared, silenced like the others. But that's okay, because the evidence survives. The truth survives. What we found in that mansion, what Thomas copied from those servers, it's real, it's documented, and it proves beyond any doubt that there was a network, a system, that enabled the abuse of hundreds, maybe thousands, of victims over decades. And more importantly, it shows that this network still exists. The people who participated, many of them are still in positions of power, still making decisions that affect millions of lives, still pretending to be upstanding citizens while hiding their monstrous acts. I don't know how to stop them. I don't know how to bring them to justice. The system, the legal system, the media, the institutions we're supposed to trust, they're either controlled by these people or too afraid to act against them. But I do know this. Silence protects them. Secrecy protects them. As long as people don't know, don't see, don't understand the scope of what happened, these monsters continue to operate. So I'm asking you, whoever receives this, whatever you decide to do with this evidence, don't let it disappear. Don't let it be buried again. These victims, these girls whose lives were destroyed, they deserve to be heard. They deserve justice. Even if that justice never comes through official channels, even if all we can do is expose the truth and let the world decide what to do with it. And one more thing. If you go looking, if you try to investigate further, be careful. What we experienced at that mansion, the supernatural elements, the shadows, the voices, I don't fully understand it. But I believe that places where great evil occurs, they absorb that evil, they hold on to it. And that evil, it doesn't want to be exposed. It fights back. Be prepared for that. Be prepared for things you can't explain, for resistance that comes from places you can't see. Good luck, stay safe, and please, make sure the truth gets out. The message ended there. 3 days later, James Morrison's apartment burned to the ground. He was never found, officially listed as missing, presumed dead. But I know better. I know that whatever happened to him, whoever silenced him, they made sure there would be no body, no evidence, no investigation. For the last 3 weeks, I've been verifying everything in these files, cross-referencing dates, checking facts, looking at the footage, and I can confirm, this is real. This is legitimate evidence of crimes that should shock the world. And I've made a decision. I'm releasing it. Not all of it. I won't show you the footage of the victims. I won't re-victimize them by sharing their trauma with the world. But the names, the dates, the financial records, the communications, all of that, I'm making it available. But before I do, I need to tell you one more thing. One more detail that James included in his notes that I think you need to know. After they left the mansion, that night in March of 2022, after they drove back to Paris, James couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them. He kept seeing shadows in his peripheral vision, hearing whispers when he was alone. And one night, about a week after the investigation, he woke up to find writing on his bathroom mirror, written in what looked like condensation, except his apartment was warm, dry. There was no reason for condensation to form. The writing said, "The mansion remembers you, and the mansion never forgets. What was taken will be returned." James documented this, photographed it, and over the following months, other strange things happened. Electronic devices would malfunction in his presence. Lights would flicker when he entered rooms, and he started having dreams, vivid nightmares, where he was back in that basement, back in those rooms, but this time he was alone, and the doors were locked, and he could hear footsteps coming down the stairs. Victoria told him, before she checked into the facility, that what they had awakened at the mansion, what they had disturbed, it wasn't satisfied with just being exposed. It wanted revenge. It wanted to make them suffer the way its victims had suffered. She said that the shadow they saw, the dark entity, it was a thought form, created by the collective evil of everyone who had participated in these crimes. And thought forms, especially ones born from such concentrated malevolence, they don't just disappear. They persist, they hunt, and they never stop. I'm telling you this because I've experienced some of these same phenomena since receiving the files. My equipment fails at random times. I hear sounds in my apartment that shouldn't be there. And I've had the same dreams James described. I know that by sharing this, by exposing what's in these files, I'm putting myself at risk. But I also know that this story, this truth, it needs to be told. The mansion still stands, isolated, waiting, holding its secrets even after everything that happened. And I truly believe, that it's still calling, still drawing people toward it, still trying to add more victims to its collection of trapped souls. The files I received from James, they contained more than just evidence of crimes. They contained something else, something that has kept me awake for weeks, trying to understand, trying to process. There were personal journals, written by some of the staff members who worked at various properties in the network, people who saw things, heard things, but were too afraid to speak up, too afraid of what would happen if they revealed what they knew. And their accounts, their descriptions of what went on behind closed doors, in basements, in soundproofed rooms, in places designed specifically to hide suffering. It's beyond anything most people could imagine. One journal, written by a woman I'll call Anna. She worked as a chef at one of the estates, not the mansion, but another property that was part of the same network. She wrote about preparing meals, elaborate dinners, for parties that would happen late at night. She wrote about being told to leave before the guests arrived, being told that the kitchen was off limits after a certain hour. But she also wrote about the sounds that would echo through the ventilation system, sounds that made her physically ill. In her journal, dated September 2017, she wrote, "I heard them again tonight, the crying, the pleading. I tried to convince myself it was coming from a television, from a movie someone was watching. But televisions don't sound like that. Movies don't capture that level of genuine terror. I wanted to call the police, wanted to do something, but I have a family. I have children. And the people who come here, the people who attend these gatherings, they're not people you cross. They're not people you accuse. They're the ones who control the police, who control the media, who control everything. So I kept cooking, kept cleaning, kept pretending I didn't hear anything. And I hate myself for it. I hate myself every single day." Anna's journal ended abruptly in November 2018. The last entry simply said, "They know I've been writing this. They know I've been keeping track. I don't think I'm going to make it out of here. If someone finds this, please, tell my children I'm sorry. Tell them their mother was a coward. But tell them I love them more than anything." Anna was never heard from again. Officially, she moved back to her home country. But there's no record of her leaving, no plane tickets, no border crossings. She simply vanished, like so many others who got too close to the truth. But here's what's truly disturbing. Here's what keeps me up at night, staring at my ceiling, jumping at every sound. The files contained a list, a comprehensive list, of properties that were part of this network. Not just the mansion, not just a handful of locations, but dozens, scattered across multiple countries, multiple continents. And according to the records, according to the financial documents, most of these properties are still owned by shell companies, still maintained, still operational, still waiting. After Jeffrey Epstein's death, after all the media attention, after all the investigations, you would think these places would have been exposed, shut down, seized by authorities. But the legal structures protecting them, the layers of offshore companies and trusts and legal barriers, they're designed to be impenetrable. They're designed to outlast investigations, to outlast public attention, to outlast everything except the evil they were built to protect. And there's evidence, documented evidence in these files, that suggests some of these properties, they're still being used. Not in the same way, not as openly. But the network didn't die with Epstein. It adapted. It evolved. It went deeper underground. James had marked several locations on a map, properties he wanted to investigate after the mansion, places where he believed the same kind of supernatural phenomena might be occurring, places where the evil had been so concentrated, so prolonged, that it had left permanent scars on reality itself. One location he had circled multiple times, with notes in the margins, was an island. I won't tell you which island. I won't give you enough information to find it, because I don't want anyone else to experience what James experienced, what his team went through. But this island, according to the files, it was one of the primary locations, one of the places where the worst acts occurred over the longest period of time. James had written in his notes, if the mansion was this active, this responsive, this desperate to communicate, I can only imagine what the island must be like. The sheer volume of trauma, the number of victims, the years of continuous operation. If places truly do absorb evil, if suffering can imprint itself on physical space, then the island must be absolutely saturated with it. It must be a beacon, a nexus of darkness that draws in anyone sensitive enough to perceive it. He never made it to the island. He disappeared before he could organize another investigation. But I've done research. I've looked into the island's current status. And what I've found, it disturbed me more than anything else in these files. The island is still there, still owned through a complex web of legal entities. And despite everything that's been reported, despite all the public knowledge about what happened there are still people who visit, still boats that dock at its shores, still aircraft that land at its private airstrip, officially for maintenance, officially to oversee the property. But the frequency of these visits, the patterns, they don't match simple property management. I found something else too, something that James couldn't have known about because it happened after he disappeared. In August of 2023, there was an incident barely reported, buried in local news from the Caribbean. A group of urban explorers, content creators looking for viral footage, they illegally accessed the island. They posted videos on social media, showing the abandoned buildings, the decaying infrastructure, the eerie atmosphere. But their final video, the one they posted just before they left the island, something was wrong in it. I've watched that video dozens of times, analyzing every frame, and you can see it in the background, in the windows of the buildings, in the shadows between structures. There are shapes, figures, that shouldn't be there. The explorers didn't notice them while filming, but they're visible in the footage, watching, following. And in the final seconds of the video, just before it cuts off, you can hear it. A voice, multiple voices, whispering in languages the explorers didn't speak, saying things that made no sense, until I had them translated. The voices were saying, "You don't belong here. You weren't invited. Leave before you become permanent residents." The group of explorers, there were 4 of them. They left the island that same day. But within 3 months, 3 of the 4 were dead. 1 in a car accident, 1 from a sudden illness that doctors couldn't explain, 1 from an apparent suicide. The 4th, he's still alive, but according to posts from his family, he's been institutionalized, suffering from severe psychological breakdown, claiming that something followed him back from the island, something that won't let him sleep, won't let him rest, something that shows him things, terrible things, every time he closes his eyes. This is the pattern. This is what happens to people who get too close, who see too much, who try to expose what's been hidden. And now I'm part of that pattern. I know that by making this video, by sharing what I know, I'm putting myself on a list of people who need to be silenced. But I've taken precautions. I've made sure that if something happens to me, the information doesn't die with me. Multiple copies exist in multiple locations, with multiple people who have instructions on what to do if I disappear. But here's what I need you to understand. Here's why this matters beyond just the sensational aspects, beyond the supernatural elements, beyond the horror. The people who created this network, the people who participated in it, the people who benefited from it, they're still out there. They're still in positions of power, still making decisions that affect millions of lives, still presenting themselves as respectable, as leaders, as philanthropists. And as long as they remain protected by secrecy, as long as the full truth stays hidden, they continue to operate with impunity. The evidence James collected, the files I now possess, they contain names, specific names, dates, locations, financial transactions, communications. It's a roadmap of evil, a comprehensive record of decades of organized abuse. And every day that this information remains suppressed, every day that these people walk free, is another day that justice is denied to the victims. I've spent weeks debating what to do, how much to reveal, how to balance the need for truth with the reality of my own safety, with the knowledge that there are forces, both human and otherwise, that will do everything possible to prevent this information from spreading. And I've decided, I'm going to release it in stages. Starting today, I'm going to begin sharing documents, redacted to protect victim identities, but containing enough information to demonstrate the scope of what occurred, the names of participants, financial records, communications, all of it, released gradually, systematically, in a way that makes it impossible to suppress. But before I do that, before I cross that line, I need to tell you about the last piece of evidence, the most disturbing element in all of these files, hidden in the server data that Thomas extracted, buried among thousands of hours of footage and millions of files. There was a document, a single document, that changed everything, that made me realize the true scope of what we're dealing with. It was a ledger, a record book meticulously maintained, listing every person who visited any of the properties in the network, every name, every date, every transaction, going back to 1991. 30 years of records, thousands of names, some visited once, some visited dozens of times, some visited so frequently that their entries fill entire pages. And the names on this ledger, they include some of the most powerful people in the world. Politicians, business leaders, celebrities, academics, people from every country, every political party, every sector of society. This wasn't just a network, it was an industry, a system that catered to the very top of the global power structure. But here's what's truly disturbing. Here's what makes this bigger than just a crime story. The ledger included something else, notes, annotations, written next to certain names, describing what each person was interested in, what they requested, what they participated in. And these notes, they reveal something that I think explains why this network was so protected, why it was allowed to operate for so long. This wasn't just about personal gratification. This was about control. This was about creating a system where powerful people could be compromised, where their actions could be documented, where they could be controlled through fear of exposure. Every visit was recorded, every act was documented, and that documentation became leverage, became power. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just a criminal. He was an intelligence asset, or at least that's what the evidence suggests. The network he built, it wasn't just for his own benefit. It was designed to compromise people, to gain control over them, to ensure their cooperation with larger agendas. And the people running this operation, the people behind the scenes, they're still out there, still operating, still using these same tactics with new targets, new victims. That's why the mansion was so heavily protected. That's why the evidence was so carefully maintained. That's why people who get too close end up dead or discredited. Because this isn't just about past crimes. This is about an ongoing operation, a system that's still functioning, still recruiting victims, still compromising powerful people, still maintaining control. And that thought, that realization, It's more terrifying than any shadow, any supernatural entity, any paranormal phenomenon, because it means that what happened in those basements, in those rooms, on that island, it's still happening. Maybe not in the exact same locations, maybe not with the exact same people, but the system continues, the network persists. I've traced some of financial records forward, following the money through shell companies and offshore accounts. And the transactions didn't stop in 2019. They continued. The same patterns, the same structures, just with different names, different locations, adapted for a post-EPSTEIN world, but fundamentally There are properties being purchased right now, through the same legal structures, properties in remote locations, properties with the same architectural features, the same security systems, the same isolation. And I have to ask myself, why? Why would these structures continue to exist? Why would this money continue to flow, unless the operation itself continues? James understood this. In his final message, the one he recorded before disappearing, he said something that I've replayed hundreds of times. This isn't about one man. This was never about one man. Epstein was a face, a name, a convenient scapegoat. But the system he represented, the network he maintained, it existed before him, and it continues after him. And until we expose not just the crimes, but the structure, not just the individuals, but the system, nothing really changes. The monster just grows a new head and continues operating. He was right. He was absolutely right. And that's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm taking this risk. Because silence protects the system. Secrecy allows it to continue. And every person who knows the truth and stays quiet, they become complicit in what comes next. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking this sounds too big, too conspiracy-minded, too paranoid. You're thinking that if this was real, if evidence this damning existed, it would have been exposed already. Authorities would have acted. Justice would have been served. But ask yourself, how many times have we seen powerful people escape consequences? How many times have we seen evidence disappear? Witnesses recant, investigations stall. How many times have we watched as obvious crimes go unpunished because the perpetrators had the right connections, the right lawyers, the right amount of money to make problems disappear? This isn't speculation. This isn't theory. This is documented fact. Names, dates, transactions, communications, all sitting in encrypted files, all verified through multiple sources, all pointing to the same conclusion. There's a network, there's a system, and it continues to operate because we've allowed it to, because we've accepted that some people are above the law, because we've decided that maintaining stability is more important than pursuing justice. Well, I'm done accepting that. I'm done staying quiet. And I genuinely hope, that by sharing this information, by forcing this conversation into the public sphere, something might change. Maybe not everything, maybe not overnight, but something. The files will start being released tomorrow. I've set up multiple platforms, multiple channels, dead man switches that trigger automatically if I disappear. I've distributed copies to journalists, to lawyers, to activists, to anyone who might be able to use this information to pursue justice. Some will ignore it. Some will be too afraid to touch it. But some will investigate. Some will verify. Some will act. And to the victims, to the survivors, to anyone who lived through these horrors and has been living with the trauma, the guilt, the fear, I want you to know, you are not forgotten. Your suffering was not meaningless. The evidence exists, the truth exists, and it will be heard. It might not bring you peace. It might not undo what was done, but at least the world will know. At least your truth will be acknowledged. I also need to warn you, anyone watching this, anyone who decides to investigate further, anyone who tries to verify this information or dig deeper into these networks, you need to be prepared for what you might find, prepared for the resistance you'll encounter, prepared for the possibility that knowledge comes with a price. What James and his team experienced at the mansion, the supernatural elements, the shadows, the voices. I believe these phenomena are real. I believe that places where extreme evil occurs, where suffering is concentrated and prolonged, they do absorb that energy. They do retain some imprint of what happened. And that imprint, it's not passive, it's active, it's aware, and it protects the secrets it holds. I've experienced enough strange occurrences since receiving these files to know that something is watching. Something is aware that I'm preparing to expose this information. My apartment has been broken into twice. Nothing stolen, nothing disturbed, but I know someone was here. I can feel it. The air feels different, wrong, like the space itself has been violated. I've had the dreams too, the same dreams James described, where I'm in the basement of the mansion, walking down that hallway, passing those rooms, and the doors are opening slowly, one by one, and I can see inside, see things I never witnessed in person, but somehow know are true. And at the end of the hallway, that large door, it's open, and something is waiting inside, something that wants me to enter. That's calling me. I wake up from these dreams drenched in sweat, my heart racing, and for a few seconds I can't remember where I am, can't distinguish between the dream and reality. And in those moments, I see it in the corner of my room, that shadow, that presence, watching, waiting, reminding me of what happens to people who know too much. But I'm not backing down. I'm not letting fear silence me, because the victims deserve better. The truth deserves to be told. And if something happens to me, if I disappear or die under mysterious circumstances, then at least I'll know that I tried, that I did something, that I refused to be complicit in the cover-up. There's one more thing I need to share before I end this. One more element that ties everything together. In the server files, there was a video, a single video file, that was marked differently from all the others. It was encrypted with multiple layers of protection, and it took weeks to crack. When I finally accessed it, when I finally watched what it contained, I understood why it was so heavily protected. The video shows a meeting taking place in what appears to be a conference room, expensive furniture, artwork on the walls, a table surrounded by men in suits. The video has no sound, but you can see them talking, discussing something, passing documents around the table. And their faces are clearly visible, recognizable. I won't tell you who I saw in that video. Not yet. Not until I release the files officially. But I will tell you this. These were not low-level operators. These were not minor players. These were people whose names you would recognize immediately. People who appear on television. People who make policy decisions. People who have shaped the world we live in. And what they were discussing, based on the documents they were reviewing, the documents I was able to match to other files in the server data, they were discussing the operation itself, planning it, organizing it, deciding how to maintain control, how to protect themselves, how to ensure the system could continue operating indefinitely. This video, it proves that this wasn't just individuals acting independently. This was organized, coordinated, deliberate. This was a conspiracy in the truest sense of the word. Powerful people working together to enable evil, to profit from it, to use it as a tool for control. And that video, it's dated 2016, 3 years before Jeffrey Epstein's arrest, 3 years before any public exposure, at a time when they still believed they were untouchable, when they still believed their secrets would never be revealed. But secrets have a way of coming to light. Evil has a way of exposing itself. And the truth has a momentum all its own. Once it starts coming out, once people start paying attention, it becomes very difficult to suppress. That's what I'm counting on. That's what I'm betting my life on. That once this information starts spreading, once enough people see it, verify it, share it, it will become impossible to contain. The usual tactics, discrediting sources, buying silence, using media connections to control the narrative, they won't work when the evidence is this comprehensive, this detailed, this undeniable. I'm also releasing instructions, detailed instructions, on how to verify everything I'm sharing. The sources, the documents, the digital signatures, the metadata, everything needed to confirm that this is real, that these files are authentic, that this isn't some elaborate hoax or disinformation campaign. Because I know, I absolutely know, that the first response will be denial. The first tactic will be to dismiss this as conspiracy theory, as fake news, as the ramblings of someone unstable. That's always the first defense. Attack the messenger, question their credibility, create enough doubt that people dismiss the message without examining the evidence. But the evidence speaks for itself, and I've made sure that it's presented in a way that can be independently verified, cross-referenced with public records, matched to known facts, confirmed through multiple sources. This isn't speculation, this isn't theory. This is documentation of actual events, actual crimes, actual people doing actual evil. Now, before I end this, before I prepare to release the first batch of files, I want to circle back to where we started, to the mansion, to what James and his team experienced there. Because I think the supernatural elements, paranormal phenomena, they're important. They're not just interesting details. They're not just additions to make the story more dramatic. They're evidence of something fundamental about the nature of evil itself. What James encountered at that mansion, what he documented, it suggests that evil isn't just a human failing, isn't just bad choices made by flawed individuals. Evil is something more, something that can take on a life of its own, something that can persist beyond the people who commit it. Those girls, those victims whose shadows remained in the mansion, trapped by the trauma they experienced, they were holding on to something. They were preserving the evidence, protecting it, waiting for someone to find it, waiting for someone to care enough to expose what happened. And that thought, that possibility, that the victims themselves, even in death, even as mere echoes of who they once were, they were still fighting, still trying to get justice, still refusing to let evil win. That gives me hope. That makes me believe that this effort, this risk I'm taking, it matters. Because if they could hold on for years, trapped in that place, reliving their trauma over and over, just to preserve evidence, just to ensure that someday someone would know the truth, then the least I can do is honor that sacrifice by making sure their evidence reaches the world. The shadow, that dark entity that James encountered, the one that seemed to be the embodiment of all the evil committed in that place. I think it represents something too. I think it represents the collective force of everyone who participated, everyone who enabled, everyone who benefited from the suffering of others. And that force, it doesn't want to be exposed. It fights back. It protects itself. But here's the thing about darkness, about evil, about shadows. They only have power in secrecy. They only thrive when hidden. The moment light shines on them, the moment truth is revealed, they lose their strength. They can't survive exposure. That's what we're doing here. That's what this is about. Shining light into the darkest corners, exposing what was meant to stay hidden, making it impossible for evil to continue operating in the shadows. And yes, there will be consequences. For me, for anyone who helps spread this information, for anyone who refuses to look away. The forces protecting this network, they're powerful, they're ruthless, and they've demonstrated repeatedly that they will do whatever necessary to maintain control. But I believe, I have to believe, that truth is more powerful than lies, that justice, even delayed justice, is possible, that good people, when presented with undeniable evidence of evil, will act. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe releasing this information won't change anything. Maybe the system is too entrenched, too protected, too powerful to challenge. But at least I'll know I tried. At least the victims will know someone fought for them. At least the truth will be out there, available to anyone willing to look, anyone willing to believe, anyone willing to act. So this is it. This is my declaration. Starting tomorrow, the files begin releasing. The evidence becomes public. The truth starts spreading. And whatever happens next, whatever consequences come, I accept them. Because some things are more important than safety. Some truths are more important than comfort. And some fights are worth having, even if you know you might lose. To anyone watching this, anyone who makes it to the end, I have a request. Share this video. Share the information when it comes out. Don't let this be buried. Don't let the usual tactics of suppression and distraction work this time. Keep talking about it. Keep investigating. Keep demanding answers. And if something happens to me, if I disappear or die under suspicious circumstances, don't let that silence you. Let it motivate you. Let it prove that the information is real, that the threat is real, that the network is real, and that they're desperate to keep it hidden. The files are prepared. The dead man switches are set. The backups are distributed. Tomorrow, everything changes. Tomorrow, the truth begins its journey into the light. And whatever that truth brings, whatever chaos it creates, whatever consequences follow, at least we'll know. At least we'll see. At least we'll finally understand the scope of what we've been living alongside, what we've been ignoring, what we've been allowing to continue. This is the Shadow Script, signing off, but not disappearing, not yet. Tomorrow we continue. Tomorrow the evidence speaks. Tomorrow the victims are heard. Thank you for watching this video until the very end. I know this was long. I know this was heavy. I know this challenges everything you thought you knew about how the world works. But that's exactly why it needs to be heard. That's exactly why it needs to be shared. Comment down below where you're watching from. Tell me if you believe places can hold memories, if you think evil can persist beyond the people who commit it. Tell me if you're ready to see the evidence, if you're prepared for what's coming. And most importantly, tell me what topics you want covered next, what other dark corners of reality you want explored, what other suppressed truths you want investigated. Hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, ring the notification bell, because content like this, investigations like this, they need to reach as many people as possible. The algorithms try to suppress uncomfortable truths. They try to bury information that challenges powerful interests. But if enough of you engage, if enough of you share, if enough of you demand this content, then it becomes impossible to hide. Leave a comment telling me what aspect of the story affected you most, what questions you still have, what connections you see to other events, other cases, other suppressed information. This is a conversation, not a monologue. Your input matters. Your thoughts matter. Your willingness to engage with difficult truths matters. And remember, tomorrow the files begin releasing. Tomorrow the evidence becomes public. Tomorrow we take the first step toward real justice, real exposure, real change. Until then, stay vigilant, stay curious, stay brave, and never ever stop demanding truth. This has been the Shadow Script, and the archives, they never forget.